talking earlier about like some podcasts, and Agnes and I had both listened to Sam Sanders' podcast on immigration, and I think that the title is one I love called "It's Been a Minute," that I listen to every week. And this week's topic was, has anything really changed under Biden? I think that was the title, and it kind of like went back to like the beginning of the history of the United States, and looked at that. So I thought it was interesting how it really talked about like how, you know, from the beginning, and how still we have these practices that are kind of like not written, but also were based on real written policies that really excluded people who were not white European descent countries. And how like people talk a lot about, well, like my grandfather came here the right way, but people just came in different ways. So yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of would represent that white demographic. And that is something ago. And then I think the latest for me is like my great grandfather, and it was basically like they were poor. And I think on my grandmother's side, they were poor. They wanted to come here for another opportunity. But I think like today, the situation is like there's war, there's famine, people are dying, like there's like corrupt government systems, and people are dying or like being, you know, like trying to avoid gangs. Like honestly, I think those are better reasons to immigrate. Okay, what are other people?
Listening to the podcast, they were just talking about how we can even revamp the immigration system. And I think one of the things we've been trying to do is kind of like adjust and edit, as opposed to like just dismantling the entire thing. It's been a system that has been excluding so many people for so long. And I think one of the things I think about is how do we do it, you know, the right way. And I also think about my family. When, you know, when we came here, I came from South Sudan. And so that process, the refugee process is 2 years. It's about 18 months to 2 years. And I'm like, 18 months to get to safety, people won't survive 18 months in a country that's war torn, or they're fleeing from, you know, the prosecution or anything like that. So I always think about what is the proper way to admit, you know, asylum seekers, immigrants, refugees. And I don't know how that's kind of like a question I guess I have for you guys. It's like what we would even take into account when we try to dismantle.
So I came from a border town from Brownsville, Texas, which is the very bottom tip of Texas. So that's like, you know, you put your hand through a fence and you're in Mexico and the United States at the same time. And my father is actually like an immigrant, and it was like weird because growing up there, it's kind of like a social hierarchy of like, if your family is like from Texas and like if they're born in Texas, you're a little bit more like educated and like you're whitewashed, and it was kind of like a badge of like honor. While like, you know, my dad was like a first, you know, came over when he was young, or not young, like, you know, he was like our age, or like my age, like 23, 22 when he first came over. That was kind of like seen as like, oh, like, you know, you're trying, like I remember trying really hard to be called whitewashed, or like, you know, million Garcias and like 10 million like Hernandez's. It was still like kind of like this hierarchy of like, and then you would still see it on the news. You would hear like presidents coming to come see us, but not because of the things we were doing here. It was because of the border wall and what was coming and what was going. And then like when you drive like from Brownsville to like Houston, like there's like 2 hours of just like nothingness, and you could see like there's like water jugs of like, so the people who are like crossing over, who are like walking through this desert, are able to like drink water. But it's like, I wonder how long, like how many miles they have to walk in order to like get to that water, and is that water even going to be like drinkable, because you know how hot Texas is. Like, so I don't know where I was going with that, but definitely like I think like when it comes to the immigration, like how to, like I think we definitely need to like dismantle it, because it's so much of like what's the right way, and like the right way, it takes way too long for like the safety of other people and like the safety of like families and children, and also just like not fair in like the end of it. Like it's just really not fair, because like some people have the opportunity to get like immigration lawyers and like all that, but it's so expensive. It's like, yeah, it's so incredibly expensive, and it's still such a long process. And but like think about the people who like need to come and they don't have any family in the United States, or they don't have all these resources, they don't know. And so like that's just, I think we like from George Bush to like President Obama and then to like Trump, like it was just like a bunch of like, I think we kind of like lost focus of what exactly our immigration policy even is. And I think we just focused on like the racial part of it rather than like the actual like policy that's like not working for anyone. I think just like for anyone. I think like, especially like in Trump's like administration, he like really politicized and like really hit on the racial part of like, you know, people from like, you know, the shithole countries of like, you know, Mexico's not saying their best, or like they're rapists, or like, you know, or like people from like the Middle East or people from Africa, like they're like the refugees are dirty and like we're not. But like, and then so I think everyone focused on that instead of like the policy itself.
Well, then Agnes, you were saying, so you were a refugee from Sudan? Because I only have experience like through my church did a like partnership where we sponsored a family from Afghanistan. So just from like that end of stuff, like Trump was talking about making it more rigorous. I don't know how it could possibly be more rigorous. It's
already such a rigorous process.
There's like this mountain of paperwork, and then you have to like get jobs, and then you have to like do. People saying it needs to be more rigorous have not actually had any experience with the actual process,
or they don't know anyone who has gone through the process. Like if they do, it would be in conversation where they're you know telling their experience, and they're able to kind of show a little bit of empathy in the process. So yeah.
But there's that question too, I guess, of like I think, and Trump was very much like, we need good workers and we need to prioritize like highly skilled people, right? But then like, is that more important than like, if people are dying and people are being killed, like, don't we have a responsibility to like help? Like, I don't know, I think safety is more important personally. And like, but also like think about like have any of you you know that there's this like video of this guy, you know, Chobani yogurt? I actually don't like Greek yogurt, but so the like owner had a factory like right in my aunt's town, like right near where I lived in upstate New York, and like he was a refugee and he like ended up employing all these workers. I think there was a popular video where they were talking about it and had them all have stock. So like there's also like you can have someone highly skilled who doesn't contribute to society to the degree that like someone with a different skill set might have. And just I think when people do come from other places, when people do have like backgrounds, like that brings more innovation just because they have different experiences. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like a very like, I don't know, it's like hard to like, because I feel like it's so like jumbled up of like what exactly is our immigration policy, and I feel like we continue to add onto a policy that we're not sure of. Like I know they just like added like that new like Greg Abbott, you know, the governor. He basically like put this new policy that police officers and state patrolmen are able to stop people just based on if they look like an immigrant, which is like ridiculous at that point. Like that's just like what's an immigrant look like.
When did he do that?
I think it just took effect maybe like a couple months ago. I know like Arizona did it first, and like it was like a big thing like in 2017, 2018, and then he was going to do it, and then I think the court said no, and then I think it just kind of they let him kind of do it, which is like ridiculous. And also that just like confuses me because his wife
illegal with a lot of things.
Exactly, like his wife is also like a daughter of immigrants. Like his daughter,
they immigrated the right way.
Yeah, but like she's also from San Antonio, Texas, and she looks just like me. So like, girl, like how, like I never understood like how do you stand by someone who like obviously doesn't respect where you come from and like your culture.
I know.
And like that's just like crazy to me, especially like you're from San Antonio, Texas. Like it's like a huge Hispanic population where people immigrate all over, like, and it takes them a long time, or they had to like cross over illegally. So like, I don't know, just like ridiculous to me. So I think it's just like a very hard thing to like pinpoint of what exactly like, because I don't even like, I couldn't even tell y'all like what exactly our immigration policy is. It's just, I know like it's hard for people to get in and like it's not right. And people are like, and there's like pictures of like kids in cages. There's like pictures of like people like on boats and like are like drowning and stuff like that. But like, where do they even go? Like, where do people like, you know, like what Agnes said, like, where do people like from the South Sudan, like, do they cross an ocean? Like, how do they, like, do they, like, where do they go? Like, we don't even like know that. And like, we're like social workers, and I feel like we would know that. And like, cause we know about like reproductive rights and all that stuff, but exactly where people go and what the process is.
We read this book, and it was a church group discussion. I think it's a young adult like book. Maybe it's an adult book, but it's like basically it was really interesting. Maybe it's Enrique's Journey might be the name. Let me look it up. But she took this like example. It was kind of almost like a case study as a book, where she followed this like boy who had crossed the border because his mother was here. And it was looking at like, I mean, like I think he was arrested for pot or something. So it was kind of looking at like, we do idealize people, but like, is that like, should that be a reason? Like, I'm not describing it well, sorry.
No, you're totally good. No, yeah, it's just like and I feel like I like went to college like at the University of North Texas. So that's like by Dallas. There's a lot of like white people there. And I feel like when girls in my sorority would get caught with like with weed and stuff like that, and they're white, like they got it off of their record real fast. But like if it was like someone like me or someone who was an immigrant, like I think that would be a whole different story of like, you know, and that's just like kind of also the double standard of it. So it's like, how do we marginalize, because everyone, like I think like weed is such like it's like so accessible now, especially because it's legal in like different states. So like, how do we jurisdict like someone like coming from Colorado and like bringing it to Texas? And they don't mean like it's just like, you know, recreational, or if they needed it for pain. It's like, why does one person get to do it and the other people have to be like marginalized or been like, well, that's why we shouldn't let immigrants in because, you know, they smoke weed, when like people make billions of dollars on the weed industry like every day.
For Enrique's Journey, the author of this book says, well, we need to give more money to like other countries for preventative programs. But we also still have to deal with, I mean, I think obviously Biden's a politician, but I'm kind of just mind boggled that like that's an issue you campaigned on, and like there's no evidence that you really had a strategy in place. Like, how did you not anticipate this? Not the like refugees from Haiti, but like, how could you not come in with a plan if you're going to complain on it, even if it's not an effective plan? Like,
yeah, exactly. Like I think he really like profited off of people's like anger of what Trump said about like the racial things, and we just needed like, that's like, I think that was like really like a defining straw for a lot of minorities and people who just like are decent human beings, and we're like, no, that's not, you can't say that about these people because you don't, you know, that's just wrong. And I think Biden really played a big, like he like harped on our emotions of like, that's wrong and I don't believe that, so I'm going to make sure everyone's able to get in because I believe that. But like, yeah, you believe it, but you have no plan, so we're hoping on you and we're voting you in, and then you're still not giving us any definite plan, which then just makes it worse for us.
Yeah, because he instilled the hope. And then I think what happened was all of these people wanted to come into the US. And then when all of these people started coming, they were like, what did we do with everybody? So it's really bad implementation.
But they didn't really like, I mean, Trump slashed the refugee numbers like way down, but Biden hasn't really restored it. Has he?
I thought he raised the cap.
Yeah.
I thought he raised the cap.
Yeah, he raised it, but I don't think it's like significant. See, like I'm the kind of person, I'm like, well, I want to prioritize safety and refugees and let everyone in. And I guess because like for me, I think you can go different ways, right? Like if you do have the background of that like white immigrant, like, and I was like, you know, white Protestant, whatever, like, so I fit a lot of those boxes. I think like for me, I'm like, I really was very lucky and didn't choose to come here. So like, well, I feel like it's hard for me to set standards for like other people. Like I feel like if everyone needs, like if you're in need of safety like that and food, that is a basic human right? So I'm just like, so then I don't know, but I would probably not be a good policymaker because setting limits, I don't know. I don't know if did any of you have ideas for like what you think would be.
I think that's like the hardest part because every immigration story is so different for different kind of people. Because like my immigration story is like different from what Agnes's is, and it's different from what yours is. So it's like, and it, like it's not like a, I don't know. It's like it affects us in different ways, and it affects different people in different ways, and like I don't know. That's just like a hard thing where it's like, I think that's why I think we need to like dismantle it, like how Agnes said in the beginning, like because it's just like so much, and I think it just added, and like we have to like go with the times and not things that we made in like what the 1800s, the 1900s, like it's just so like long ago where like we really need to think about like the refugees and like what things they're going through like in Syria and the Middle East and in Afghanistan and like in Mexico and like the gang violence and stuff like that. I think we haven't like took the time to like really sit and say like what's the problem and like why are people coming over here and what can we do to fix it. But yeah, it's just like really difficult because everyone's so different, like all the stories are different and all the things that they need are so different.
Yeah, I agree. It is very hard, and like I've heard stories of people like waiting 10 years to get their citizenship and then, you know, doing it the right way and having to take a test and having to study for it. And then also people sometimes get married to get citizenship as well. So it's very—
You're a little frozen.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
No, you're good
now. Okay. So I was just saying, like, it just depends because, as you were saying, everyone's story is so different because sometimes you can marry to get citizenship, or, you know, sometimes you have to wait a long time, like 10 years and take a test. So it just really depends.
So what I was saying was just like how these minorities come in, refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers, whoever it is, and don't have a prosperous life here. I mean, they live in low-income communities that don't have resources. Their children struggle too as well. So it's like a generational struggle that occurs just so they can, quote unquote, have a better life. Whatever that looks like to them is just better than what they were previously living. And I think that for you to put, you know, your life, your kids' lives, and risk all of that just to come to America, I think that's something we should also take into account. Like, this is serious. I'm trekking waters, these things for a little bit, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think last week, as someone like did their case where they went up and like talked about policy, and like they talked about how like a lot of like labor workers are like passing away because of the heat that they're going through and like working for such long hours, and like those people like who are immigrants and refugees come and like take those jobs and like don't have like the privilege of being able to say like go to like a government assistance place or go to the police or go like complain and say like my boss is like overworking us by like 20 hours, they're not giving us water, they're not giving us, you know, because you know they're scared, like so they just take it. And I think people who are like the contractors and stuff, like sometimes they take advantage of the fact that they have illegal immigrants and saying like I'm doing you a favor. So like I think like with refugees and immigrants, like they like know like they're not like they know they're not able to like say what they want to say and like have like basic human rights that like I could go to like an HR department and say like, hey, like that they're treating me ugly, they're treating me wrong. But like just think about like my dad like wouldn't be able to do that if, you know, if he was when he was my age, like whatever. So like that's like such a weird thing. And I think like that's why like when people come here, it's like for a reason, and like people really like need to look into the reason of why they're coming over.
One of the people I still like think about all the time from when I did the hospital, when I was at the hospital in Washington. It was a hospital for like indigent poor, like if you have a severe mental illness, if you're some people experiencing homelessness. So there was this one like this old woman who I don't actually know where she was from. I don't remember, but she only spoke Spanish, and so I was referred to see her as a chaplain. And I mean, it is extra work when you have someone who doesn't speak English, if that's the only thing you speak. But like I felt like I was not using interpreters enough. And then my supervisor was like, "Oh, you do a good job using them." And so I'm like that's a problem. Like if I'm not using them enough, and so, like someone tells me I am like the best at using them, like that's a problem right there. But like, I mean, it is kind of like priority care, right? Like this interpreters, like they tell you like use an interpreter every time they're available, blah, blah, blah. And then in reality, that's not true. But anyway, but I also attended rounds for that floor. And so like the social worker there who had to discharge the patient to a SNF, to like assisted living, like couldn't do it. So this patient, and it was just really sad to see her like get better at one point. And then like one of the words I know was piñata, and so I was like, why is she like piñatas? At first it was like fun, it's a party, but no, she was saying she felt like she was beaten like a piñata. And so she got better for a little bit, but there was no place for her to go, and eventually she got worse and died. And it was just really the saddest thing there. Like that is not a time. And then I go to like my uncle who employs workers. I know, maybe they're all documented, but he had people being carries born in the US there, and he's like talking about the illegals and like they should just go back to their country. And I just wish and he's like Christian fundamentalist person, like really like this poor little old lady, like the solution is just like deport her. Like no,
Yeah, it's like a weird, I think like people like who are immigrants and refugees have it a little bit weirder than like people like from New York and stuff, like who are from Texas, because like it's like there's people who are like just like us who like come from the same families and same stories, but then there's people who are like our colleagues and our friends and like our school teachers and like, you know, big prominent things, and like they totally go against of who we are as people and like where our family's from. So it's like us as like students, it's like hard to like, I don't know, like contribute to that, but like you need the job. Like you know, my parents came over like for a reason. Like I'm not gonna be poor. Like I'm gonna try to do whatever I need to do, but it's like it's hard because like these people don't even like respect where I'm coming from and like the culture of it. So I think like I like not saying like New York doesn't understand, but I feel like New York's a little bit more like liberal. Yeah, like a little bit more liberal and more like like in a Democrat way of like, you know, and New York's like such a known place of like where immigrants come from and stuff like that. Well, Texas, it's known for that, but it's like seen as like not as this like, oh, they saw like the Statue of Liberty. It's like, you know, it's seen as like wrong. So I don't know, it's like a weird, I've always like noticed that. I think like people from like California or people from like, you know, a northern state have a different perspective of what it is like for people here, like in the southern states.
Do you feel like native Texans who like were born in Texas, like are you saying like there's a difference between that and people who are native New Yorkers?
Yeah, it's more of like it's just like maybe like depends on like who, like where they're like from, like what they believe in. Because I feel like if you're like a native Texan, you grow up with like these like ideas of like what it is to be American, what it is like to fit in. And like, as you know, like Texas is like its own like country, basically. Like we have different like rules and different like cultures and stuff like that. But it's like, I don't know, it's like a weird like kind of limbo of like, yeah, like your white friend likes like Tex-Mex, but also their parents voted for Trump in the 2016 election. They want all immigrants to go back.
Like you have commonalities that you wouldn't like with someone from New York like me. but then there are other differences. I mean, I will say I do think my experience growing up in the Northeast is people do look down on the South as being like backwards. And at the same time, like they definitely have their own issues with racism. Like definitely.
Yeah. I like saw this Daily Show like kind of segment, and it was Ray, I think his name is Ray Black Jr., and he's like a Black man, and he goes with his like white colleague to Boston, which is known as like a race, like it's one of the most like racist
it's a very white city.
Yeah, like cities in like America. And like they go like on the street and ask them like after a Red Sox game, like, do you like believe like Boston's racist? Oh no. But like they are though. Like I think like like even people from the north also like have their own issues of like racism, but I think they like to cover it up because at least we're not from the south.
Yeah, well, I think like this is very, sorry, tangent, but so I grew up in upstate New York, which is like a 5-hour drive to the city. Excuse me. And I grew up in this like hippie liberal, like super liberal town, like Green Party. We had a socialist mayor when I like in the 80s and 90s, social democrat, which is pretty uncommon. And then we're surrounded by farmland. So like, I think like my city has this thing where they would like the biggest employer is like a university. So there are people, a lot of people from like other places, but it's also a very like white town, right? So there's like, I think people take pride in their progressive views and like they do try to be progressive on issues, but I would say like there's a difference. And I think like it's easy to profess those values, right? When you are mostly white, when you are like surrounded by people like you. And I think, yeah. Like I think too, like there are ways in which our town, which was like priding itself on progressive values, like, yeah, there were also like, and actually now there's huge problems with racism and like some violence too, that like, I mean, the violence I don't think was always there, that's different, but it exists. And I think it's like what's worse is when you're trying to say it doesn't, like we have good policies, blah blah blah, and then it's like you're just kind of blinded.
Yeah. And like I think at UT, like Austin, in Austin, it's like known and like they pride themselves on being like weird and like progressive and like it's like accepting of all, but like it's like
a
really
very
like,
white city too.
Yeah, it's a very white city, and like they like gentrify everything where like they put like these Black and brown people and like all these other like minority groups like way out where like because they can't afford to live, like Austin's like a super expensive city to like live in and to like breathe in. So like of course it's easy to be like progressive and like super accepting when it's you don't have to really accept a lot of people. Like it's just like, oh, maybe like a couple like Black kids and a couple Hispanic kids, maybe a couple Asian kids from like who go to UT, but like we don't really have to like deal with the whole like family and communities that really like spark from, because I get to like go home like on Christmas and Thanksgiving breaks. So I think like I totally like understand where it's like I think like it connects like to your city and like also like parts of like Austin or like parts of like Texas of like it's like liberal and it's like, or like Houston, or you think of it as like Dallas where it's like all these like big like meccas of like different cultures, but there's still like gentrification that kind of pushes out the things that they have to deal with. But of course it's easy to say like, oh well, I'm progressive, when you don't have to be progressive to the actual people.
I will say though, one thing that's super weird to me, so like I'm a member of the United Church of Christ Congregationalist denomination, which is like super progressive value social justice, but yeah, it has these roots that are the Pilgrims and Puritans. So it's kind of an interesting history how that evolved. But my church in Ithaca is a sanctuary church, which is the middle of nowhere in upstate New York. So like there aren't that many people. I mean, like we have a family there, obviously there's a need. But my church here in Houston, which is bigger and I think has, I don't know, I honestly don't know, like we're not that big, but like it does seem to have money, or at least they're spending more money than my home church. And like we do, like there would be a space to have people who are undocumented and be a sanctuary church, and it's not. Actually, and I've thought about raising that issue, but I haven't yet. But I just think that's so weird, like of all places to have a sanctuary church, like be Houston.
Yeah, exactly. I think especially like when Kirk and Harvey hit and Joel Osteen didn't want to open up his church, when it's like, I don't know if you guys ever been in there, but it's like huge. It's like so big. It's like huge.
I like drive by it every day. And
yeah, it's like when I like been in there a couple times, and like it's just like it could house so many people, and like especially like where that placement is, it's like in the inner city of Houston. Like those people who like, you know, that needed it were like Black and brown people, and like still like he didn't open it up. It's like you have to be bullied into opening it up, which is like, you know, going up to like if you're like of the church and stuff. So I don't know, just want to like bring that up of like, even when it's like it felt like a hurricane like that affects everyone, like still like it's not being opened up to like to be a sanctuary, I guess, for people who need it, at least for the time being.
I was just thinking of all the things that y'all were saying and all the valid points that you make. And especially I think the US says that we're very diverse, because look at all the people we have, but the treatment and just the way that, you know, they see race and, you know, they see the color of their skin. It's not, you can't say, oh, look at all these people. You have to really look at how they're being treated.
And who are the people that have the power, right? Like,
yeah,
it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, can anyone think, I think that a lot of us are like very like supportive of like, is there anyone here who thinks like, oh, here's a limiter that might be valid as a way to like decide to limit the number of people who come in? Because honestly, like I don't, that's hard for me, but I guess if we're doing policy stuff, we do have to think of that.
Yeah, I like watched a Vice interview of Juarez and El Paso, like and their border cities or sister cities, and they're talking about like the influx of like guns that go into Mexico, but no one ever talks about like that situation of like America, like Americans bringing a lot of guns into the Mexican, you know, territories, and that's how these cartel members are able to like have these huge AK-47s and stuff like that. And like it goes into detail in the interview saying like literally like just a person who's an American citizen could go into like an El Paso gun shop and get like all these guns, and it's no issue, could do it in 20 minutes. But they don't really talk about that, but they talk about the drugs coming into from Mexico into the United States. I don't know. So I think like we also need to look at that. I think it's like a two-way street of like, yes, like America's bringing guns into, but it's like, but why are they bringing guns into it when there's drugs coming in? So it's just like, I think we also have to like look at who's, I don't even know. Like because it's like not who's coming in, because most of these people are not drug dealers. Most of these people are not safe, and most of these people who are bringing in the drugs are American citizens who like are Hispanic, who could speak like Spanish and English, or like able to do that. But like, of course, they're gonna see like a Hispanic name and be like, oh, well, they're a Mexican immigrant, so that's why X, Y, and Z. So I think like the violence of it, I don't know. That's just like hard to like determine of like. I don't know.
A lot of the people who are in the position to get caught, right, are the people who might be doing like just who aren't even doing it for that reason. Like maybe they need to feed their family. Like that is not who should be held responsible for those. That is interesting. So like when I was in seminary, we did this thing called alternative context. So we went to Jamaica for like almost a month, but it wasn't like the tourist parts of Jamaica. It was like Kingston. And that what surprised me was that, so then we like met with all these ministers and like learned more about their ministry and like what issues they were concerned about. And like every single minister brought up like the drug trade and how they think it should be decriminalized because it causes violence in their country. The drug trade, when people are bringing drugs into the US where there's a market, creates violence in Jamaica, which I thought was really interesting and a little surprising.
Yeah, that's like a context. That's like a really cool like policy like to think about, because like when we think about like decriminalizing like the drug trade, it's like, oh my gosh, and it's gonna be like crazy, but like sometimes it works. And if you like look at like Oregon, who like decriminalized like all drugs, and they see like a lot less like opioids like overdose, and a lot more people like not getting like contracting like all these diseases that come from substance abuse because of like decriminalizing all drugs,
Right.
not just like weed or alcohol. Well, alcohol was always there, but like
not always. We had that what
the
17th Amendment.
But like when I heard, I was like, yo, that's like crazy. Like that's just like, how are they gonna monitor like all that? Like imagine, I feel like it's gonna go up, but like I think like the more radical it is, like like I think there's like positive like enforcements, but it's just like hard to like put it into action.
Feelings about it. I think the thing for me though, like I'm white, right? So like I feel like I'm not as impacted or I am impacted, right? But I'm impacted in a way that like grants me more rights and takes away other people's rights. Right. So like, yeah, I can't say I'm not impacted. Obviously I am. It's a system. Yeah, I think though, like for me to look at it as a like the whole drug legalization as like not from a perspective of like people taking the drugs and the impacts, but like the violence, like and like from the production aspect of like what does the market, an illegal market, create in terms of like production was kind of interesting.
Yeah, canceling the like immigration policy and starting like over, and then that's when we could see the new.
But I like what would, if we were to start over, like what would we do?
Yeah, I mean that's the hard part where it's like I think like I don't know, and that's the thing where it's like I can't even like I feel like that's why the immigration policy is so like odd to like me, because it's like everything else is more like into light, while like this immigration policy we just know it's so radicalized about who's coming in, but not like why they're coming in, and like what policies they have to like follow, and why do these people like drown and cross like rivers and stuff like that for this opportunity, when in actuality like there has to be like obviously something's like detrimentally like wrong in the system in order, because human beings are like hurting themselves to be able to like just to have an opportunity for but I don't know, like I don't know how it would look like to I feel like I just want it to be easier for people, like but still like in a like checks and balances. I don't know what's also like,
and you have competing
no, go ahead
you have competing values, right? Like I think maybe most of us in social work we like value social justice, we value, well, actually hopefully all of us do, like self-determination, like all the core values and like safety. But I think there are people, unfortunately, in our society, like who, right, like you have Trump, and not just Trump. I think even like people who call themselves liberal, who would be like, okay, well, we need like educated people, whatever that, like formal education, or like, people in tech or whatever. And so like, I guess with policy, you'd have to address those competing values.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like when you said some liberal people also like think that way, I don't know if you guys ever seen the movie Get Out by like Jordan Peele, where like it's a good movie, you should definitely watch it.
I've heard of it.
It's really good. So basically like they're like liberal, but they still say like these microaggressions where it's like like I don't know, and they're so like oblivious to it, and I feel like being like it happens like every day sometimes, like
sure I do it.
And like it happens like every day, and it's like sometimes it takes me a while to even process what people said. Like it wasn't until like days later where I'm like, oh wait, that was like not cool, or like that was like racially motivated. But sometimes you can't even get mad at the person because they don't even mean it in that way. So it's just like it's just like a lot of like different ideals and like personalities coming together.
Yeah,